have you ever played a game and thought, there's a better version of this? It's right there, underneath all the mess, under what went wrong during development, and you're sitting there thinking, this could have been incredible. I'm not talking about games that are completely broken. I'm talking about the ones that actually hurt a little bit. The ones that you can tell what the studio was going for, and you can also see that they just weren't ready to pull it off. I have a few games just like that. I want to talk about what went wrong, but more importantly, what they could have been, because that's the part that actually sticks with me. Not that they failed, but that we lost something genuinely interesting. Let's start with Redfall. Redfall can best be described as right developer, wrong type of game. Arcane Austin is known for immersive sims. Prey, Dishonored are their bread and butter. They drop you into a world and let you figure it out and play with it. So the idea of Redfall was really interesting. Redfall's concept was an open world cooperative vampire shooter, which on the surface sounds great, but instead of staying in the lane that the Arcane Studios Austin has carved out for themselves, they got pushed into making a live service title, the publishers changed their mind, and then they got caught in no man's land. Redfall was ultimately a victim of development hell, but also strange pivots from Arcane's parent company ZeniMax and also partly Xbox themselves. The game seemed to pivot twice, from a more immersive experience to a games as a service to whatever the final product actually was, ultimately ruining the reputation of the studio and leading to its closure. But I can't help thinking of how this game could have been something incredible with the DNA of Arcane pumped back into it. With the benefit of hindsight, let's look at what the game could have been. Firstly, scrap the co-op element entirely and stick to their single player focus. Condense the 4 playable characters into a big skill tree with lots of different options. It could have taken the original 4 members and had those elements, put them in, and it would have been genuinely special to have something to play around with. The best parts of Redfall, and in fact the best parts of most Arcane games, is the art direction, visual identity, and immersiveness. Keep that. Keep the exploration and reward us for doing it, the same as Prey. They had the general idea in terms of combat and scope, but it got muddied and changed in direction too many times to eventually get in the game that we did. If only they'd stuck to what works for Arcane instead of succumbing to the live service push and then the ultimate change, it would have been even better and it wouldn't have resulted in the way that it did. It was a massive disappointment for me personally because the concept of being a vampire hunter is genuinely interesting. There haven't been many games like it, but sadly, we'll never know if that game can be fully realized. But if you're enjoying this video so far, I'd appreciate if you leave a like on the video, subscribe if you haven't already, as it genuinely helps. But on to the next game. The next game is actually 2 games of the same type that kind of went on similar trajectories. Avengers and Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League. Same problems, different publishers. Both of these games on paper should have been easy wins. A superhero loot game with a cast of characters that could have been built out, featuring a massive potential roster of the Avengers, and on the flip side, the villain equivalent being the Suicide Squad. However, these games didn't live up to expectations, but they're more linked than you actually think. Both games came from single-player developers, Crystal Dynamics being known for the modern Tomb Raider trilogy, and Rocksteady, the studio that defined the superhero genre with the Batman Arkham games. Both of them were asked to make a live service game, and unfortunately neither of them could deliver. The gameplay for both of these games wasn't terrible on its own. The Avengers had pretty decent combat at the time. Each hero felt distinct, with a variety playing as Thor versus Iron Man versus Captain America. The issue was it became very repetitive quite quickly. Enemy types became repetitive, damage sponges, and really uninspiring mission design. Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League also suffered from similar issues, but in a different way. From a studio that gave us really tight combat in the Arkham series, I and many others was looking forward to see how that translated to supervillains. Instead, they gave every character guns and abandoned the DNA of what made them successful. They added bullet sponges, repetitive mission types, and uninspired mission design as well, and you can see how it suffered the same way the Avengers did. Both games lacked any real end game, outside of running the same story missions on repeat on harder difficulties, fighting later bosses. Both of those games' loot systems didn't help that either because they were lacking anything beyond stat sticks from each hero and villain. The stories for each of the games struggled as well. Avengers had some pretty cool moments, and for the Suicide Squad it did land a few funny jokes here and there, but neither of them were particularly memorable or enjoyable, which was sad, being that both games came from great storytellers. The loop was wrong in both games. The stories didn't work, and neither developer looked ready to ship a live service title. Go figure. And that's the core of it. Crystal Dynamics and Rocksteady make tight narrative action games, or comic action games in this case with Rocksteady. Asking them to jump on a trend and build an infinite loot grind with an endless content pipeline was never going to work, not without the right foundations. It's a really particular skill set, and only a few studios have been able to do it consistently and be successful with it. However, what bothers me the most about both of these games is that they are massive missed opportunities. I won't sit here and say I know how to make the perfect loot system or engaging mission design. If they had got the core of the game right, we could have had countless expansions, battle passes with cool cosmetics, and new characters added for people to play. But there's also another angle to look at this. Imagine both studios had thrown off the shackles of live service and actually made single player games instead. These could have been so good. Crystal Dynamics could have made a 20-hour story game with each of the characters getting interesting missions designed specifically for them instead of being generic. Rocksteady could have embraced the villain side of the Arkhamverse and still had the idea of killing the Justice League at its core, but with specific combat styles and missions dedicated to each member of the squad. These games would have been day one for most fans anyway, but this would have meant the hype around them would have gone astronomical. And I mean, look at the hype around Wolverine in September. That's going to be a more condensed experience, and that's the right way to do it. What we got instead was two of the most talented single-player studios in the business making live service games that nobody really asked for, which is a real shame. Let's talk Anthem. Anthem was another example of a studio being ill-equipped to make a live service game, and this time it's one of the most decorated RPG makers ever. Mass Effect, Dragon Age, Knights of the Old Republic, real heavy hitters. Instead, they were tasked with creating another live service trend by EA. Are you sensing the pattern a little bit here with these games? Anthem on paper sounded amazing. It had a variety of different mech suits that we could fly around in, having this horizontal and vertical world. The weight of the javelin suits combined with the arsenal of weapons for each of the suits was awesome. This made combat really fun to engage with, which was sadly the only real highlight of the game. It suffered from a poor story, poor activities, and a lackluster loot system and endgame. All the things that you need for it to be successful. This is all coming from a dev team that knew how to craft really great RPG systems. All of this came to no surprise to me and many others, considering every single red flag that happened during development. A dev team forced into the Frostbite engine, which was a technical nightmare for the studio. Leadership was changed far too many times, leading to the game restarting multiple times, even being overhauled just 18 months before release. Even to the point where 2 game directors left the project 2 months or so after the failed release. To touch on how bad the loot system was, it was just fundamentally broken at times. Players were chasing things they didn't even know what they were chasing. There was flaws in the perks that they were getting, and it's a fatal flaw across the board if you are making a looter shooter and the loot doesn't work. This is an interesting parallel when we talk about their competition being Warframe and Destiny, that also suffered poor launches and had problems of their own. But the real disappointment is that Anthem had the bones to be an incredible game. The gameplay, the flight, the world building, but there was no meat on those bones at all. And that's the incredibly frustrating part, because it could have been the third pillar of the genre alongside a Destiny or a Warframe. The difference is, those games got post-launch support for years. Anthem support got cancelled almost immediately. Even with the hint of a 2.0 rumoured, the game officially shut down in January of 2026, which sucks because it means nobody can ever play it again and experience what it could have been. Anthem might go down as one of the biggest failures in gaming history for me. The next game leads quite nicely into talking about a game that actually should have been a live service title, but it wasn't, and that's Outriders. Outriders was a game for me and many others that almost got everything right but fell just short. People Can Fly created a wonderful game in my opinion, with the variety of fun classes to play, great cover combat. It really nailed the power fantasy with the great amount of build diversity across each of the classes for people to engage with, but sadly it was hampered by an endgame system that was never truly built until a year out when the World Slayer expansion came out. And here is where Outriders fell short. It was marketed explicitly as a standalone game, which isn't necessarily bad, and it wasn't marketed as a live service game, and it was structured in that way when you played it. Story, gear grind, endgame expeditions, and then you were kind of finished. But the problem was that players hit a wall in the endgame rather than a consistent loop. With no promise of future content until a vague expansion a year later was actually revealed, players didn't know where they stood. And that's the frustrating irony. The one game that actually stepped back from being a live service title got punished for it because people wanted more. However, that was just one of around 3 or 4 key problems that the studio had. The servers at launch were basically on fire, and for such a small studio, it couldn't handle the sheer number of players at launch, and combined with quite possibly the worst loot bug I've ever seen in a game, you can see how it had a tough start. This bug would wipe your whole inventory, which was then patched, but the fix made it even worse as well. Unfortunately, I didn't get affected by this, but I had heard some horror stories about it. The game did actually recover after a few days, which was good, and the expansion a year later attempted to fix a few of the core issues with the game, and actually was quite fun. But even the new endgame focus mode lacked punch to keep people grinding endlessly, and that's the real tragedy. They did try to fix it. They tried to make it better, but players had already moved on. You don't get a second chance a lot of the time in the games industry these days. The studio's small size would have meant round-the-clock development, which isn't always good if they wanted to turn into a live service, and the lack of extra microtransactions that they could have had and trying to get more people to play meant that the game couldn't turn a profit, which ultimately led to layoffs and People Can Fly turning into a support studio at Square Enix, even cancelling the planned Outriders 2. Every time I think about Outriders, it makes me sad because it was so close. It had all the markings of a truly great game that could have had a really long lifespan, and even I put in over 250 hours on it. The game is still playable today as a complete single-player package, but I think it deserved a little bit better, and that's the frustrating thing. The one game that could have actually worked as a live service wasn't allowed to be one. This brings us nicely to Halo Infinite. Halo Infinite is very personal to me because as a long-time Halo fan, I wanted to see 343 break away from the shadow left by Bungie and create a truly great Halo game on the third time of asking. The franchise needed it. Unfortunately, Infinite was set up to fail right from the pitch because they didn't plan to make a game. They planned to make an evolving platform and essentially turn Halo into a live service. It was supposed to last 10 years. Whilst it only lasted 5 in its current iteration, the potential the game had was squandered really fast. The slipspace engine was supposed to bring Halo into the modern day. In reality, it was incredibly difficult to work with for developers, slowing down patches and new content to a crawl. But the real problem was that Microsoft contracting policy combined with the slipspace engine made everything worse. Every 18 months, someone who finally understood the engine was cycled out and replaced by someone starting from zero, and the cycle continued. This was the behind-the-scenes problem that bled into everything else. No split-screen co-op, no campaign co-op at launch, massive gaps between content drops. The campaign itself was actually solid, but the DLC was cancelled not long after launch, leaving the story full of loose ends. And the biggest kick in the teeth, Halo Infinite for me was one of the best multiplayer Halos we've had in the modern era. Gone were the basic loadouts from Halo 4 and the highly competitive movement in Halo 5. Infinite was balanced. It had people fighting for resources all over the map, not gimmicks. It was free to play and had a massive player base at launch, 2 months before the campaign even dropped. Then content droughts, no new maps, bare bones playlists, no fun modes, a full year for Forge until that launched. It killed the initial hype and left players like me genuinely bummed out because there was nothing to do. We cut to 2026, the game is actually really great now. The Forge is really robust and a lot of the maps have been put into the playlists. The playlists themselves are full of really silly modes and competitive ones. Loads of cosmetics, rank progression, events, it's all there now, fully realized. A stable team, a properly supported multiplayer, and campaign stories told across years, that was the dream, but the reality was that it failed. It could have been perfect. It wasn't necessarily that the idea failed, the studio did. And I think Xbox also failed Halo as well. Halo Infinite could have been the franchise leader that Xbox needed, but it wasn't. Now, we have to look forward to the remake of Combat Evolved again, and the next Halo game being vaguely off in the distance. And to round out the list of games that we've talked about today, we need to talk about another personal one for me, which is Mass Effect Andromeda. Where do we even begin with this one? Mass Effect Andromeda is best described as a firestorm of problems. Starting with the Frostbite engine, which we've talked about before, it hampered BioWare with Anthem and did the same here. It wasn't designed with RPGs in mind, it was made for Battlefield. Every tool BioWare had built up across the original trilogy had to be rebuilt from scratch, which isn't necessarily an easy task. Combined with 5 years of development going down the drain when they couldn't make a procedural generation system work within the Frostbite engine, Andromeda, the game that shipped, was roughly made in 18 months. Add to the constant leadership changes and you can see how it was a slippery slope to failure. You had the less than memorable story, the animation memes that were littered across the internet, and many fans, myself included, were underwhelmed. It just didn't feel like a BioWare Mass Effect game. Now, why would this have been perfect? The original trilogy had a open-ended but satisfying endpoint in my opinion. Andromeda was meant to be a fresh start in a different galaxy. New crew, new adventures, new interesting characters. A chance to evolve the combat a little bit more but keep the storytelling and combat DNA from the other games. They even teased the Quarian arc, which was a mystery to a lot of people apart from the lore that we knew about it, and it was left dangling for a DLC or a sequel that didn't come. After that, the 1-2 punch of Andromeda and Anthem led to BioWare being heavily restructured and probably isn't the same BioWare that we knew. People were laid off, EA shelved Mass Effect entirely, and it wouldn't be until 2020 with the Game Awards that we got an announcement of the next game, but we've not really had too much to do with the game since, and we're 6 years on from that announcement. It's crazy to me that both Anthem and Andromeda were essentially built in 18 months. Both of them flopped. Surprisingly, BioWare is still here, because most studios would have been shut down. And that's the thing. Andromeda isn't necessarily an outlier on this list. None of them really are. It's just a painful example of the same pattern. 7 games, different studios, different publishers, same story. Teams handed a genre they didn't know how to build, on schedules they didn't even get a chance to realize, and chasing trends that were already eating themselves. And honestly, I'm just a bit sad, because if you look at the list of studios we've talked about, Arcane, BioWare, Rocksteady, Crystal Dynamics, these are some of the best single-player developers out there. They've made some of my favourite games, and I'm sure some of yours too. Which is why I'd love to know, what games do you think were almost perfect? What games would you add to this list? Let me know down in the comments section. And as always, if you've enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like on it, subscribe to the channel, and this has been Jimbo, and I'll see you guys next time.